Chapter 4: Chemical, Physical, and Economically Motivated Food Safety Hazards for Human Food, presented by David Rosson. As with biological hazards, in developing or modifying a food safety plan, it is important to be aware of the potential chemical and physical hazards associated with the food products and processes under consideration. It is also important to be aware that economically motivated hazards may be introduced. When these hazards are understood, preventive measures can be implemented to control them, thus preventing illness or injury. This section builds on the overview information presented in Chapter 3, Biological Food Safety Hazards, and discusses chemical hazards that are ingredient-related and process-related hazards, commonly of concern in food processing facilities and those holding food products. Radiological hazards, which are encountered less frequently, are discussed under chemical hazards. This chapter also addresses physical hazards and economically motivated hazards that may be associated with specific types of food or food production practices. As with biological hazards, information from this chapter is useful for conducting a hazard analysis for a food. The hazard analysis process is discussed in Chapter 6, Hazard Analysis, and Chapter 7, Preventive Controls, Determination. Recall that the Preventive Controls for Human Food Regulation defines hazard as any biological, chemical, including radiological, or physical agent that has the potential to cause illness or injury. Chemical hazards include food allergens, mycotoxins, toxic chemicals, radiological agents, etc. And physical hazards include metal, glass, hard plastic, and other objects that can cause injury. By the end of this chapter, participants will be able to identify chemical, including radiological food safety hazards, identify physical food safety hazards, identify economically motivated food safety hazards, recognize potential chemical and physical hazards, their sources, and contributing factors. Identify potential controls for chemical, physical, and economically motivated food safety hazards. This slide from the previous chapter identifies many conditions that are highly undesirable in food, such as the presence of insects, hair, filth, or spoilage, but that are not necessarily food safety hazards. Economic fraud and violations of regulatory food standards are equally undesirable. All of the defects on this slide should be controlled in food processing or through GMPs. However, many times they are not directly related to the safety of the product. Unless these conditions directly affect food safety, they are not included in a food safety plan. For example, decomposition can be a food safety hazard when biogenic amines or other toxic substances are produced. An example of economic fraud that involves a potential food safety issue might be substituting a less expensive ingredient that has a food allergen for a more expensive ingredient that does not contain the allergen. An important thing to remember is the terms filth, foreign material, or extraneous material can be used interchangeably. It refers to any type of matter that does not obviously belong in a food product. Adapted from OraLab Manual, Section 4. Let's take a look at chemical hazards. The presence of a chemical residue in a food is not always a hazard and may be unavoidable. The amount and type of chemical substance determines whether it is a hazard or not. Some chemical hazards can cause injury, illness, or death, such as food allergens, discussed later, or high concentrations of certain chemicals. Other chemical hazards require exposure over a prolonged period to have a toxic effect in humans, such as lead contamination of candy, resulting in impaired cognitive development in children and cancers caused by certain toxins in food. The safety of chemicals used in food and food processing must be evaluated on a use-by-use basis. Regulatory limits are set for many chemical contaminants. These limits consider long-term and short-term exposure, consequences, quantity, toxic potency, and potential benefits, like antimicrobial activity and similar properties. FDA action levels for specific hazardous chemicals in specific commodities are published in action levels for poisonous or deleterious substances in human food and animal feed. If there is no tolerance, action level, or other regulatory limit for a specific hazardous chemical in a specific food product, concentrations must be below the limit of current standards for analytical testing. FDA will do a case-by-case evaluation for heavy metals if there is no tolerance, action level, or regulatory limit established. The FDA has a listing of chemicals that once were used or were proposed for use that are not permitted in food. Listed in 21 CFR Part 189, action levels for poisonous or deleterious substances in human and animal feed, contains information on levels of chemicals that are prohibited in certain foods and is available in the chapter resources and should be reviewed. As previously mentioned, naturally occurring chemical hazards include those present in a food or produced in the natural environment unrelated to human activity. Naturally occurring chemicals include food allergens, mycotoxins, decomposition byproducts, and plant toxins. For example, some cheeses and other food may contain histamine as a result of microbial fermentation, converting histidine to histamine. Some people are sensitive to low levels. Others require exposure to high levels, produced in very ripe products of fermentation. Stratton et al., 1991. Extended fermentation can result in decomposition of the food. Another type of naturally occurring chemicals are plant lectins. Phytohemagglutinin, PHA, is a lectin found in raw or undercooked beans. They are proteins that bind to carbohydrates, and some plants produce them as a natural defense mechanism. In canned and properly cooked kidney beans, the low levels of PHA will not affect humans, but at high levels in raw beans, PHA can lead to nausea, severe vomiting, and diarrhea. Adequate cooking will remove and destroy this toxin. Other process contaminant hazards in certain plant-based foods include acrylamide in certain plant-based foods and 3-monochloropropane 1,2-diol esters, 3-MCPDEs, and glycidyl esters in refined oils. Chemicals that are added as part of the formulation are part of the food itself, but if too much or too little is added, health risks can occur. Yellow number 5, or sulfites, are examples of additives that can become a hazard when they are improperly added. A chemical hazard due to misformulation could also involve preservatives. If a manufacturer accidentally adds the preservative, such as sodium benzoate, in excess of a maximum use level, exceeds 0.1% in the finished food. Unintentionally or incidentally, present chemicals may inadvertently get into the food. These may be present in the processing plant, sanitation chemicals, come in with agricultural items, pesticides, herbicides, or be introduced via other routes. Common ingredient-related hazards include pesticides, drug residues, heavy metals, decomposition byproducts such as histamine, mycotoxins, radiological hazards, unapproved food and color additives, food allergens, and substances associated with a food intolerance or food disorder. Some ingredient-related chemical hazards are natural components of food, such as food allergens, or are produced in the natural environment, such as mycotoxins, whereas other ingredient-related hazards e.g. pesticides, drug residues, heavy metals, are contaminants of raw materials and other ingredients. Certain pesticides can be applied directly to food or crops to control weeds, insects, or microbial contamination. Other pesticides cannot be applied directly to food, e.g., for rodent control. Pesticides can be used legally only if they are registered with the appropriate authority and used according to conditions described on the label. Drugs are an important part of animal health, welfare, and management, but may present a chemical hazard when not used appropriately. Heavy metals such as arsenic, lead, and cadmium may accumulate in plants if the growing environment has high concentrations of these chemical hazards. Chemical hazards can also form due to decomposition if the food product is not stored appropriately, e.g., histamine in temperature-abused cheese. Mycotoxins are chemical hazards produced by certain types of molds when extensive growth occurs on commodities of concern. Radiological hazards from an environmentally contaminated source are rarely encountered in food. However, when they do occur, radiological hazards can present a risk. Other ingredient-related chemical hazards include food and color additives. The potential risk to consumers increases when these substances are not properly controlled, such as exceeding the usage rates or accidentally introducing an additive into a food for which it was not approved. Food allergens and substances associated with a food intolerance or food disorder, e.g., sulfites, gluten, can be ingredient-related hazards, but they can also be process-related due to misformulation. Chemical hazards can also be process or facility environment related. Undeclared allergens can result from mislabeling within the process. Mislabeling can occur due to incorrect label design and or incorrect label application or use of a product label. Cross-contact results from the unintentional incorporation of a food allergen into foods that are not intended to include those allergens. A food ingredient can be a chemical hazard if it is added in excess of a maximum use level. For example, sodium benzoate is permitted for use in food as an antimicrobial agent with a maximum use level of 0.1% in the food. A chemical hazard due to misformulation could occur if a manufacturer accidentally adds sodium benzoate such that it exceeds 0.1% in the finished food. Industrial chemicals are another example of process-related chemical hazards that could contaminate food during production, e.g., if chemicals used to clean a production line are not adequately removed from the production line. Radiological hazards can become incorporated into food through the use of water that contains the radionuclides during food production or manufacture. Facility-related hazards can include contaminants from the food processing environment that can contaminate food during production, e.g., if heavy metals are leaching from containers or utensils. A useful source of information on the hazards that may be present in different foods is the FDA's Reportable Food Registry. This registry collects information from the food industry and from public health authorities on foods or feed that are likely to cause serious adverse health consequences or death to humans or animals if they are used. Biological hazards represent the primary category of hazards reported through the registry. However, undeclared allergens in human food represent more than 1/3 of the reports. These are discussed later in this chapter. There is more information on the Reportable Food Registry in the chapter resources. Food allergens are naturally present in certain foods, and these foods are examples of ingredients normally used in food that do not present a chemical hazard for most people. However, they can be life-threatening for those with a food allergy. It is estimated that food allergies affect 4 to 6% of children and 2 to 3% of adults in the United States. The presence of undeclared allergens in food is a major cause of product recalls. A food allergen reaction is the body's immunological response to proteins in the food that the body sees as foreign. These reactions can be fast-acting, yet also unpredictable, and should not be confused with food intolerance, such as lactose intolerance. People with food allergies can experience a variety of symptoms that can be mild to severe and can affect different systems in the body. The severity of the response depends on the amount of the allergen consumed and individual sensitivity. Mild allergic responses can be treated with antihistamine, but serious reactions like anaphylaxis are treated with epinephrine. Anaphylaxis is a generalized reaction, which can include multiple organ failure, any of the symptoms listed above, severe loss of blood pressure, and cardiac arrhythmia. This reaction can be fatal. In the U.S., tens of thousands of emergency room visits and 150 to 200 deaths per year can be attributed to anaphylactic reactions. Reactions usually occur between 1 minute and 30 minutes after exposure, but may take up to 2 hours. Food allergy sufferers may experience multiple severe reactions in their lifetime. Children with asthma and multiple food allergies are at increased risk for anaphylaxis. Milk, soy, and egg allergies may be outgrown, but peanut, tree nut, and shellfish allergies often persist throughout life, although individual reactions may vary. Do you, a family member, or close friend have a food allergy? Consider this. Either way, if yes or no, think about what steps you or they must take to protect loved ones. In the United States, the Food Allergen Labeling and Consumer Protection Act of 2004 mandated labeling of the original 8 allergens: milk, eggs, fish, crustacean shellfish, tree nuts, peanuts, wheat, and soybeans. Sesame became the 9th major food allergen through the Food Allergy Safety, Treatment, Education, and Research FASTER Act, a federal law passed in 2021 that took effect in January 2023. Most food allergies are reactions to these food items. Labeling of these major food allergen groups, if present, is required along with identifying the specific allergen, specifically for tree nuts, fish, and crustacean shellfish. The specific type of tree, nut, fish, and shellfish must be labeled. Note that shellfish includes crab, lobster, or shrimp, which are crustaceans, but not molluscan shellfish, e.g., oysters, clams, mussels, or scallops. The FDA has published more specific information about what is considered within each category of allergens. For example, almonds, coconut, lychee, walnuts, pecans, etc. are all considered tree nuts. The FDA's labeling regulations do not address advisory labeling, which may also be referred to as precautionary labeling. FDA also does not address threshold limits of allergens present. The FDA has responses to frequently asked questions related to food allergens on their website. Food allergy sufferers must practice complete avoidance of food allergens in order to avoid allergic reactions. Sometimes the ability to practice avoidance depends on factors outside the control of the individual. Proper labeling of food products along with strict monitoring of labels is required for avoiding specific allergens. Food processors must have accurate information about their ingredients and understand their processing conditions. related to allergen cross-contact opportunities to fully assess their own products. Accurate allergen labeling is required to be addressed in the food safety plan. Allergen labeling must be addressed in the food safety plan, which is consistent with the observation that most allergen recalls are related to labeling errors. Examples include using incorrect label design, using incorrect allergen terminology on labels, not labeling butter with the term milk, which is required by labeling regulations, not declaring an allergen on the label, not carrying allergen information through to the label from an ingredient, not declaring allergens that are in processing aids, and using the wrong label or package for a product. Sometimes computer operator errors can occur with automated label management systems. This can be caused by misentry of information by the label supplier, resulting in incorrect labels being printed. This can also occur within a facility where the possibility exists to print and apply labels in-house, even when incorrect allergen ingredients were entered into the computer system. Unintended food allergens due to cross-contact can occur due to lack of cleaning shared equipment between allergen-containing product and product without allergens, lack of control during product changeovers, wrong ingredient used during formulation, improper use of rework, and inadequate storage of allergenic materials when exposed to the environment. Many of the other causes listed on the slide are related to lack of knowledge of the issue or inadequate management of change. Ensuring that all relevant people are aware of potential allergen issues can minimize the potential for harming a person with a food allergy and can help avoid a recall. Understanding how undeclared or unintended allergens get into products is the starting point for developing an effective allergen management program, which is covered in Chapter 11, Food Allergen Preventive Controls. Pcqi, while not required by the preventive controls for human food regulation, product design can play an important role in minimizing food allergen hazards in production. For example, some products require a protein source as a foaming agent, and egg, soy, or milk protein can potentially have the same functionality. If a product developer knows the allergen profile for a production line, they may be able to choose ingredients with the same allergens, thus reducing allergen cross-contact concerns. Consider only adding new allergens to products when they make an important difference in the taste or functionality of the product. If an allergen-containing ingredient is required, consider different formats to reduce allergen cross-contact issues. For example, it is difficult to make walnut brownies without introducing walnuts, but if making a mix, a separate packet containing walnuts could be used instead of loose walnuts in the mix to minimize the exposure of equipment to tiny pieces of walnuts that make cleaning difficult. Before a new allergen is added to an existing product or line, consider the potential costs to manage the new allergen in the project plan. This can help determine if the change is really beneficial. If adding a new allergen to an existing formula, including a label element such as new formula, is useful to alert allergic consumers that a new allergen is in a product. Many food allergic consumers are very brand loyal. Jackson's et al. 2008. A review of cleaning and other control and validation strategies to prevent allergen cross-contact in food processing operations outlines components of a comprehensive allergen control plan, which meets or exceeds the requirements for preventive controls compliance. This document is available for review in the chapter resources. This slide describes scenarios when allergens might pose risks to help explain when allergen controls could be needed. Note that this is not an all-inclusive list. These are examples of when such controls might need to be considered. Whenever there is an opportunity for mislabeling, misformulation, or cross-contact. Examples include supplier handles multiple allergens, facility processes multiple products containing different allergen groupings, storage and handling of different allergen-containing ingredients and food products, different products produced on same, shared equipment, similar products with different allergen-containing formulations, similar product labels but have different allergen declarations, personnel practices when the same people handle products with different allergen profiles. Allergen controls will be discussed further in Chapter 11. Mycotoxins are chemical hazards produced by certain types of molds when growth occurs on commodities of concern. Aflatoxins are a type of mycotoxin that is produced by certain molds that grow on commodities like corn, peanuts, and others in the field or during storage. Other mycotoxins, such as ochratoxin A, fumonisins, deoxynivalenol, DON, or vomitoxin, and zearalenone, can present a hazard in crops, such as grains, fruits, and tree nuts. Padolin is a potential issue on certain fruits. The molds that produce mycotoxins typically become established in commodities of concern under stressful growing conditions before harvest. The molds can also grow during storage of grains when the grain contains moisture above a certain level, and which may vary by crop and mold type. For a given harvest, if local growing conditions have been good, mycotoxin formation may not be a problem. However, when stressful growth conditions for crops or particularly wet harvest seasons for some crops occur, mycotoxins are a risk. Conditions such as insect damage and drought stress can also promote the formation of mycotoxins. Mycotoxins can enter the food chain. Those secondary channels, for example, moldy aflatoxin, B1, containing grain-fed 2 cows, can be metabolized to produce aflatoxin, M1, by cows and passed into their milk. A variety of controls throughout the supply chain can be applied to reduce the potential for mycotoxin formation. First, there are controls associated with harvest, including those that prevent incoming grain with preformed toxin from mold growth in the field. Controls must also be in place after harvest to prevent mycotoxin development during handling and storage. Mold and potentially preformed toxin will be present on incoming grains. Rapid drying can prevent mold growth and mycotoxin formation during storage, while slow drying can increase the risk of mold growth. If handling and storage conditions are not dry, these conditions may lead to mold growth and mycotoxin formation. For other commodities such as fruit, color sorting may be helpful. Testing of the product at various stages can be done to reject material with unacceptable concentrations, such as with fruit juice concentrate. It is important to note that studies looking at the effect of processing on mycotoxins have demonstrated that while some reduction may occur, complete elimination is not achievable. Milani and Pcqi, 2014. It is important to be aware of the conditions, e.g., weather, insects, that could allow mold growth and, therefore, cause mycotoxins to increase to harmful levels. Controls are then applied where these conditions might occur, typically outside of the receiving facility. Some chemical substances are added during formulation. They include food additives, color additives, preservatives such as sulfites, and nutritional additives such as vitamin A and D fortification in milk. Other chemicals may be used in processing, e.g. antimicrobials, used in wash water for fresh cut produce. All of these substances are intended to be used at safe levels, but could become a chemical hazard if they are added in excess of a maximum use level. Maximum use level is defined in Appendix 8, Definitions, and is discussed on the next slide. FDA sets the maximum use levels, concentration, manner of use, and maximum allowable residues for certain chemical substances in food. See action levels for poisonous or deleterious substances in human food and animal feed in the chapter Resources. Keeping within these limits is important for safety as well as regulatory compliance. These chemical substances are not hazardous if properly applied and controlled. Potential risks to consumers increase when these substances are not properly controlled, such as exceeding the recommended usage rates or accidentally are introduced in the wrong place or food. Chemicals can become part of a food without being intentionally added. These incidental chemicals might already be in a food ingredient when it is received through the supply chain. For example, fruits or vegetables may contain small but legal residues of approved pesticides. Packaging materials that are in direct contact with ingredients or the product can be a source of incidental chemicals, such as inks. Cleaning and sanitizing chemicals are necessary to maintain a sanitary environment for the production of food products, and small amounts of sanitizers may remain on equipment surfaces. It is important to follow label instructions to ensure their safe use. Proper sanitary design can help manage residual sanitation chemicals, such as through elimination of deadheads in equipment. Most incidental chemicals from the environment have no effect on food safety, and others are only a concern if they are present in excessive amounts. Incidental chemicals also include accidental additions of prohibited substances, a brief discussion of pesticides, herbicides, industrial chemicals, heavy metals, drug residues, and radiological hazards follows. Some chemicals need to be used in the facility to keep the food operation running smoothly and efficiently. These include chemicals used as part of maintenance and sanitation operations. Chemicals used in the food facility must be approved for use and used appropriately, so they do not pose risks to the food that is being produced. The possibility of a cleaning and sanitizing chemical or lubricant making minor contact with food always exists, since these items are not technically food ingredients. This incidental contact should not lead to the contamination of the food. To be registered as a lubricant or sanitizer that allows for incidental contact, the product must be formulated in accordance with the FDA Code of Federal Regulations, 21 CFR Part 178, or have GRAS status. The 21 CFR gives guidance on ingredients by providing a specific list of chemical compounds and additives which are allowed. Other chemicals have more restricted uses. They must be identified and properly stored to avoid contact with foods. In some situations, maintenance chemicals, such as coolants, need controls to prevent and detect accidental release into product. Certain pesticides can be applied directly to food or crops to control weeds, insects, or microbial contamination. Other pesticides cannot be applied directly to food, e.g., for rodent control. Pesticides can be used legally only if they are registered with the appropriate authority and used according to conditions described on the label. Numerous U.S. regulatory programs address aspects of pesticide usage, like applicator licensure, usage instructions on the label, official monitoring of pesticide residues in foods, and enforcement actions against violators. Experience in the United States has demonstrated that fruits and vegetables grown in the United States have a high level of compliance with U.S. pesticide tolerance regulations, and the occurrence of unlawful pesticide residues in food is likely to be infrequent and unlikely to have a significant public health impact. Because of this, pesticide use in the United States is frequently managed through application of GMPs. The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, registers pesticides for use in the United States, establishes label instructions for use, and sets tolerances for residues of pesticides in food based on safety and conditions of use. The FDA tests the food for pesticide residues for compliance with U.S. tolerances. If a U.S. tolerance has not been established for a particular pesticide in a commodity, then any amount measured may be considered violative. Therefore, check to see if pesticides used in foods that are imported are in compliance with U.S. pesticide laws. Within the U.S., compliance rates for pesticide compliance are typically high. Import compliance rates may vary, though. Per the latest EPA pesticide data, 2021, the rate of samples with violations, not presence, absence of residues, varied by commodity and country. Thus, it is not always that imported produce has a higher violation rate than domestic products. In many cases, it is because some commodities do not have an established tolerance. It is key to note that not all countries have the same requirements as the United States, but all imported produce must meet U.S. requirements, which can be different than the country where they are grown. It is important to be aware of the criteria about the specific commodity and what might impact its pesticide status, e.g., where grown, the local requirements, etc., to determine what controls might be needed. Drugs are an important part of animal health, welfare, and management, but may present a chemical hazard in foods originating from these animal sources when the potential chemical hazards are not managed appropriately. The presence of inappropriate drug residues in food may cause short-term effects on consumers, allergic reactions, or chronic toxic effects. Animal drugs require pre-market approval before they can be legally used. Drug residues, e.g. antibiotics administered to dairy cows, present in food derived from an animal, such as milk, can be a hazard if a tolerance has not been established for the food, or if such a tolerance is exceeded. If drug residues are identified as a hazard requiring a preventive control, in the hazard analysis, the application of a supply chain program would be considered as a preventive control. Heavy metals, including arsenic, lead, cadmium, and mercury, may be of concern in certain foods as a result of agricultural practices, e.g., use of pesticides containing heavy metals, or because crops are grown in soil containing elevated levels of heavy metals due to industrial waste, or the leaching of heavy metals from equipment, containers, or utensils that come in contact with foods. GMP controls, such as the controls on equipment and utensils in 21 CFR 117.40, generally can control chemical hazards, such as heavy metals, that can leach from food contact surfaces. Heavy metals such as arsenic, lead, and mercury may accumulate in fish or plants if the growing environment has high concentrations of these chemical hazards. Examples include arsenic accumulation in rice, lead accumulation in carrots grown in fields that previously were orchards treated with lead-based pesticides, and mercury accumulation in large fish. Cadmium is mined and then released into the environment, mainly through air dispersal during smelting. Once in the environment, it then can move through the soil and be taken up by certain plants, such as rice, other cereal grains, potatoes, and other vegetables. Assessment of the growing region prior to use can help to avoid these hazards. Consumption of heavy metals in foods can lead to adverse health consequences. For example, lead exposure can impair cognitive development in children. Consumption of inorganic arsenic has been associated with cancer, skin lesions, developmental effects, cardiovascular disease, neurotoxicity, and diabetes in humans. Food crops can be harvested from areas that are contaminated by varying amounts of industrial chemicals, including dioxins and polychlorinated biphenyls, PCBs. Dioxins is a collective term for a group of environmental contaminants that includes certain dioxin, furan, and dioxin-like, PCB, compounds that are found throughout the world. They are released into the air from combustion processes, such as commercial or municipal waste incineration, and from burning fuels, such as wood, coal, or oil. Burning of household trash and forest fires can also result in the release of dioxins and furans into the environment. Accidental or intentional release of transformer fluids has resulted in the presence of PCBs in the environment. Because dioxins break down very slowly, dioxins released in the past from both man-made and natural sources still exist in the environment and cannot be quickly reduced. Dioxins can be deposited on plants that are then eaten by animals. Thus, they may be concentrated in the food chain, so that livestock, fish, and shellfish can have higher concentrations than the plants, water, soil, or sediments around them. An evaluation of the potential for contamination of crops by dioxin and related materials may be worth considering. PFAS, per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, are widely used, long-lasting chemicals, components of which break down very slowly over time. PFAS are found in water, air, fish, and soil at locations across the nation and the globe, and are found in the blood of people and animals all over the world. Scientific studies have shown that exposure to some PFAS in the environment may be linked to harmful health effects in humans and animals, but there are thousands of PFAS chemicals, and they are found in many different consumer, commercial, and industrial products. This makes it challenging to study and assess the potential human health and environmental risks. The EPA researchers and partners across the country are working hard to answer critical questions about PFAS. Supply chain controls can be ways to manage these risks. Radiological hazards are rarely encountered in food. However, when they do occur, radiological hazards can present a health risk. According to the World Health Organization, Pcqi, typical levels of radiological hazards in food would have to be consumed over a period of time to present a risk. Examples of radiological hazards include radionuclides such as radium-226, radium-228, uranium-235, uranium-238, strontium-90, cesium-137, and iodine-131. The most common way these radionuclides are incorporated into foods is through use of water that contains a radionuclide during food production or manufacture. For example, in certain locations in the United States, high concentrations of radium-226, radium-228, and uranium has been detected in private wells. This should be considered in the hazard analysis in these regions, but would not be applicable in most regions. Radiological hazards also may result from accidental contamination, such as contamination arising from accidental release from a nuclear facility, or damage to a nuclear facility from a natural disaster. In 2011, radioactivity was detected in milk, vegetables, and seafood produced in areas neighboring a nuclear power plant, damage during an earthquake and tsunami in Japan. Frequently, a certificate can be obtained from a municipal water supplier that demonstrates compliance of water to U.S. Environmental Protection Agency EPA standards for radionuclides. Many chemical hazards can be effectively managed through GMPs and other prerequisite programs. The hazard analysis process determines the chemical hazards, requiring a preventive control, understanding where the facility's ingredients come from, and assuring the supplier has appropriate controls in place to manage chemical hazards is the first step in managing such hazards. This may require a supply chain program as a preventive control. Sanitation preventive controls can be an important preventive control for allergens if products with different allergen profiles are manufactured. Allergen labeling is important and requires allergen controls if any of the facility's ingredients or raw materials contain food allergens. See Chapter 11. Food allergen preventive controls. Process preventive controls may be relevant to certain potential chemical hazards, depending on the nature of the product. Consider the fact that GMPs, including proper chemical use and personal hygiene practices, can be part of controls for chemical hazards. Chemical hazards can enter food as naturally occurring substances, e.g., allergens, as ingredients or raw materials that are part of the formulation but may be misused, and as unintentionally or incidentally present substances. The top cause of recalls is related to food allergens. Allowable levels, if any, are established by FDA or EPA for pesticides, which also provides guidance on potential controls for many chemical substances. A supply chain program may play a key role in managing chemical hazard risks in incoming raw materials and ingredients. Sanitation, allergen, and process preventive controls may also be important controls, depending on the product and process and results of the hazard analysis. Let's take a look at physical hazards. In addition to identifying biological and chemical hazards, the food safety team must also conduct a hazard analysis to identify and evaluate known or reasonably foreseeable physical hazards, such as stones, glass, and metal fragments. C 21 CFR 117.13 0B 113. Physical hazards include any potentially harmful extraneous matter not normally found in food that can cause injury, though laceration in the mouth or intestinal tract or through breakage of teeth. Depending on the size and shape of the object, it may cause choking in young children or have other adverse effects. The FDA's Health Hazard Evaluation Board has supported regulatory action against products with hard, sharp, and pointed fragments of 0.3 inches to 1.0 inches in length. See FDA 2005 in Chapter Resources. Such fragments have been shown to be a hazard to consumers. Physical hazards can be either ingredient-related or process-related. Ingredient-related hazards may inherently be in the ingredient due to harvesting practices. For example, metal, glass, plastic, and/or stones may come from farm field debris and show up in ingredients harvested from the field, e.g. produce, spices. In addition, physical hazards in ingredients can also be introduced from the supplier's manufacturing facility or processing equipment, which are referred to as process-related hazards. Process and facility-related physical hazards can be introduced into food products from poorly designed or maintained facilities or equipment, the application of faulty procedures, or improper employee practices. The table below provides a quick overview of potential process-related physical hazards. Keep in mind that not all foreign objects found in food during food processing or holding present a true food safety risk. Objects like string, paper, or eggshell, for example, may occur, but are unlikely to present a threat to health in most situations. The food safety team should address in their food safety plan only those hazards that are reasonably likely to cause injury. Controls on other foreign material could be addressed with GMPs. Glass hazards. Glass fragments can cause injury to the consumer. Glass inclusion can occur whenever processing involves the use of glass containers. Normal handling and packaging methods, especially mechanized methods, can result in breakage. Glass fragments originating from other sources must be addressed, e.g., through GMPs, and many facilities that do not pack in glass prohibit the presence of glass in the production environment to reduce the risk of glass getting into the product. Plastic. Plastic is frequently used as a substitute for glass or wood in food handling areas. In selecting plastic material, the use of less brittle material will reduce the need to consider plastic as a true risk to human health. Loose plastic may also be a potential choking hazard. Metal hazards. Metal-to-metal contact in equipment can introduce metal fragments into products. Examples include mechanical cutting and blending operations in equipment that has parts that can break or fall off, such as wire mesh belts or screens. Fine metal shavings may not present a hazard, but hard and sharp fragments of the size noted above are a hazard to consumers. This hazard can be controlled by subjecting the product to metal detection devices or by regular inspection of at-risk equipment for signs of damage. Wood. Like other potential physical hazards, wood can present a potential choking hazard, and less commonly, a potential hazard for cuts in the mouth in certain situations. The hazard of cuts depends on sharpness of the edges of the wood, which may not be an issue in a moist food product. Many facilities avoid the need to consider wood as a hazard by limiting or prohibiting the presence of wood in areas where food is exposed. Others may consider the history of complaints to determine if a true health hazard exists. Stones. Certain ingredients, especially those of plant origin, may occasionally have stones present in the raw material. Depending on the size and shape of the stones, they may present a hazard for dental injury or choking. Stones frequently are heavier than the ingredient material, thus washing steps, flotation, riffle tanks, and similar steps can remove stones from a process. The food safety team should assess the frequency of observation of stones from their source of supply to determine if they present a hazard requiring a preventive control. Pits. Pits can be a risk in ingredients that contain them, posing a choking hazard. Choking occurs when a person cannot breathe because an object blocks the airway, windpipe, esophagus. The potential for a choking hazard is a consideration for foods specifically targeted to young children because of their smaller windpipe and because of their swallowing mechanism and ability to chew are less developed than that of an adult. This is emphasized in the anatomical diagram. Foods that are frequently associated with choking in children include those that have a cylindrical shape and can be compressed, which allows them to wedge in a child's throat. Foods that present a high risk for a child's choking hazard include hot dogs and similar sausages, round candy, whole grapes, nuts, peanuts, seeds, raw carrots, apples, popcorn, chunks of peanut butter, marshmallows, and chewing gum. While standards related to choking hazards for foods intended for children do not exist, the Consumer Product Safety Commission has standards for children's toys, including a small parts test fixture, SPTF, that is used to assess whether a piece size presents a potential choking hazard for young children. This device, pictured in the figure above, may be useful to evaluate foods. If the product fits into the cylinder, it may be a choking hazard for young children. Manufacturers designing food specifically for young children may wish to consider this to evaluate whether the food represents a risk and redesign the product if that is the case. The American Academy of Pediatrics article on prevention of choking among children provides background information on reducing this hazard for food products. Check out the chapter resources. Sources of physical hazards are wide-ranging and can include contamination in raw materials and other ingredients, and flaws in the design of the facility or its equipment. In addition, improper procedures, or the lack thereof, and their implementation by employees can result in physical hazards being generated. For managing hazards in ingredients, a firm can rely on its supplier to control the hazards through a supply chain program, or the firm can have process controls within their facility, such as metal detection and the use of screens, which can be effective strategies. GMPs can help manage hazards in the facility, or hazards introduced from people. Proper maintenance helps to ensure that glass used in the facility is properly shielded and maintained, e.g. lights, gauges. Preventive maintenance can be used to assure equipment remains intact, so pieces, such as nuts and bolts, do not come loose or vibrate off, and also to detect equipment deterioration and shedding when used over the recommended service life. Having established procedures to handle packaging materials can help prevent extraneous paper or corrugate from getting into foods. Employees must follow GMPs to avoid the inadvertent introduction of foreign objects, such as a pen from a shirt pocket, falling into the product stream. Last but not least, let's check out economically motivated hazards, or economically motivated adulteration. While it is a rare occurrence, hazards may be introduced into food for the purposes of economic gain. Economically motivated hazards, or economically motivated adulteration that affects product integrity or quality, but not food safety, should not be addressed in a food safety plan. However, food safety hazards could arise from economically motivated adulteration. It is important to be aware when something might be a potential economically motivated adulteration hazard. Examples include changes in worldwide economic situations, or in price, change in sources or suppliers, or shortages. The Preventive Controls for Human Food Regulation states that the hazard analysis, hazard identification, must consider hazards that may be intentionally introduced for purposes of economic gain as well as other reasons. A Congressional Research Service 2014 report provides information on economically motivated adulteration of food and food ingredients. Everstein et al. 2014 identified 137 unique incidents in 11 food categories. See additional reading at the end of the chapter. Economically motivated hazards are typically managed through the facility's supply chain program. Remember, the facility only needs to focus on economic adulteration that has a history of resulting in a hazard in food. Examples where economically motivated adulteration hazards have occurred in the past may prompt inclusion of an economically motivated adulteration preventive control if risks to humans might result. An example of a widespread incident of economically motivated adulteration occurred in China, where melamine, a nitrogen-rich industrial byproduct, was added to diluted dairy products by some milk firms to increase the apparent protein content. This resulted in more than 290,000 ill infants and 6 deaths in that country. In light of this incident, recognizing the potential for melamine to be an economically motivated adulterant in milk products from a country where melamine adulteration has occurred is prudent. Conversely, since none of this adulterated milk was exported to the United States and no U.S. suppliers have been a source of food safety problems due to milk products adulterated for economic gain, the FDA does not expect a facility to consider the potential for melamine to be an economically motivated hazard when using domestic milk products or milk products from other countries with no history of melamine adulteration. Another example of economically motivated adulteration is the addition of dyes containing lead to ingredients such as spices or candy to enhance color. Lead can accumulate in the body over time and cause health problems such as impaired cognitive development in children. Lead chromate, a chemical with a vibrant yellow color, has been an adulterant in turmeric to change the color. FDA, 2013. Lead oxide, a red chemical, was an adulterant in paprika to enhance its color, resulting in dozens of illnesses and several deaths in Hungary. Annan, 1995. Sudanensis, an orange-red powder, used to be added to chili powder as a coloring agent, but is now banned in many countries because it is classified as a Category 3 carcinogen, IARC, 2014. Contamination of an ingredient prepared using chili powder containing Sudan led to a massive recall of food products in the United Kingdom, UK Food Standards Agency, 2005. The FDA discovered another economically motivated adulteration incident when it determined that ground peanut shells were added to cumin to increase its weight with a less expensive filler product. However, the addition of peanut products led to allergen concerns in the spice from the peanut residues. In 2023, the FDA investigated reports of children with elevated blood lead levels indicating potential acute lead toxicity. The FDA's investigation found apple cinnamon fruit puree and cinnamon-flavored applesauce as a source of the lead contamination originating from discount cinnamon. FDA's leading hypothesis is that this contamination event was the result of economically motivated adulteration of the cinnamon used in the applesauce. Chemical, including radiological and physical hazards, can present a food safety risk if not controlled. The severity of the risk can depend on a number of factors, including the consequence of exposure and the frequency of exposure. Preventive controls must be designed, documented, and implemented for all food safety hazards, determined to be significant and therefore requiring a preventive control. Because there are many potential hazards that could be considered in the production of food, it is important to identify those that are of such importance that they must be managed using preventive controls to ensure that the facility will be able to focus resources on these hazards every time. The hazard analysis process is an important step to identify those hazards requiring a preventive control. This is addressed in Chapter 6, Hazard Analysis, and Chapter 7, Preventive Controls Determination. You have completed the lecture for Chapter 4. Be sure to complete the knowledge check as well as the Chapter 4 exercise. See you in Chapter 5.